Thanks so much for inviting me to speak today. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. So you've asked me to say a few words about my involvement with GROW, which is the grassroots organizing of Western Wisconsin, and their Civic Solidarity Project. I want to warn you right up top that I'm not going to stay on topic. I will, one of you. I will absolutely tell you all about GROW and the work that our Polk County team has been doing, but I also want to talk today about the type of organizing that GROW is doing, relational organizing, which is exactly what it sounds like, organizing through relationships, and what relational organizing does to and for us. So just to be a little more concrete, a little less mysterious, here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to tell you a little bit about GROW, how I was invited into GROW's work, and then I want to talk about the power of invitation within organizing work and also within our UU faith at its intersection with social justice. So that'll take me about 20 minutes. I think I timed it yesterday. And then we'll have 15 minutes to talk as a group. So solid amount of time. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Everybody's still on board?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as promised, here's a little bit about GROW. Directly from the front page of their website, GROW is a grassroots movement of people across Western Wisconsin building power to protect our communities and shape a future where all of us can live and work with dignity, look out for our neighbors, and make ends meet. That sounds good, right? Yeah. I believe I first heard about GROW when Emily and I moved to St. Croix Falls in 2019, so a while ago. I was desperately searching for ways to feel engaged in this new local community, and I somehow found a GROW pamphlet or a flyer, I think at our local library. Their work sounded really cool. I liked their mission. I liked how local the efforts were. So this was a network of community organizing in a handful of counties in Western Wisconsin. At the time, they were doing work around fair maps. And I was like, this is important. This is something I care about. I signed up for the email list. I had very good intentions. But most of the work that GROW was doing at that time was over Zoom. And I didn't know anyone who was a member. And because part of what I really wanted was to connect with other people in real life after sitting in front of my laptop all day, that didn't work for me. I went to a couple of events, but I really couldn't find the juice to stay involved. I didn't take any steps into deeper engagement at that time. Later, I learned that this deep personal desire I had to be breathed on by other human beings, get to know them, would be called my self-interest. So your self-interest is what motivates you. It's what will drive you to become involved with a campaign or take a particular action. We all have self-interest, of course. I would really like to hear what yours is in that discussion time that we talked about. So in this case, my self-interest was, please God, let me have a conversation that doesn't involve a mute button. And because GROW couldn't offer me that at that time, and no one was calling me up to say, hey, let's ride together to the Fair Maps meeting, my good intentions and my desire for fair maps in Wisconsin just weren't enough to keep me engaged. But I kept GROW in mind. I stayed on the email newsletter. And then one day, a little less than a year after the second Trump victory, I heard from a few friends here locally that there was a new GROW initiative called Civic Solidarity. And the Civic Solidarity Project would focus on resisting authoritarianism at the local community level. The first stage of the project would focus on research meetings. And the goal of these meetings was, and this is a direct quote, to map power, build relationships, and prepare for future action when authoritarian incursions arrive in our communities. These folks that I knew were going to join the Polk County team. They said it was invite only. And I thought, oh, an invitation. That made me feel good. I was still really searching for ways to connect, and I wanted to feel so badly like I was taking some small action to counter the absolute cruelty that I saw in the administration's laws and actions. And then as a side benefit, I got to be in a club with all these people I admire. Okay, I'll check it out. Moving into the Civic Solidarity Project involved a lot of invitations, actually. I had to talk to an organizer. I had to attend a training. There was pretty high cost to entry. But I invited my wife, Emily, to join me, and we learned that more of our St. Croix Falls neighbors were also going to join. So this was starting to sound fun. It felt so good to have a task. And the meetings were well organized and sweet. We met in people's homes and in the offices above the Luck Co-op. I thought, excellent. I can resist authoritarianism and make friends? I love this. Because you know what? Resisting authoritarianism is a pretty abstract concept. But building relationships is not. And GROW's organizing model puts relationships at the center. So in our civic solidarity work, we're meeting as a group. We're holding one-to-ones. We're getting to know each other, how we think and feel, what brings us to this work, what matters to us. So relationship building actually isn't a side effect or benefit of our anti-authoritarian work. In many ways, it is the work, because the way we build power is together, by caring for one another. Individually, we may not have much power, especially compared to a U.S. representative or an ICE agent or the president. But together, that's different. We can care for each other. Together, the Polk County Civic Solidarity Team has conducted nearly 20 research meetings with folks who hold power in our community, including school superintendents, county board supervisors, hospital administrators, and more. We're trying to get to the bottom of their self-interest, to see how we can encourage them to resist the actions that will harm our communities. We drafted and delivered a letter to our county board members outlining the cost of H.R. 1, which is Trump's big, beautiful bill, to ourselves, our neighbors, our friends, urging them to act. We're also planning a listening session for our community members, and we're beginning to think through additional actions for the spring. And this is just as, I think, if not more important, we're growing a community, right? We're building and deepening connections to one another. Our core group has a standing meeting every 2 weeks, alternating Zoom and in person. There's really no escaping Zoom, is there? In addition to this, GROW organizes check-ins for all the county teams doing this work. So we're building connections within our county and beyond. I really value the action that we've taken as a civic solidarity team. But the thing that feels the most meaningful to me about GROW is that it offers a place for me to get to know my neighbors better, to hear what matters to them, and to tell them what matters to me. That's what keeps me motivated. I want to show up because I know they'll be there. It makes me care about this work in a way that is different from reading a newspaper article or even going to a protest. It makes me feel less alone. By doing this work, we're helping to care for one another. So this part of organizing work is something that the authors Miriam Kaba and Kelly Hayes describe in their recent book, Let This Radicalize You. The title references a well-known quote from Kaba, "Let this radicalize you rather than lead you to despair." That quote is like my mantra right now. Kaba and Hayes are two longtime organizers and activists. They work on prison abolition, youth incarceration, really difficult issues. And when they talk about what deepened their work as activists, where they learned the most, they don't talk about big actions or speeches or achievements. What they talk about are the conversations that they had with their friends or their teachers in the car on the way back from the protest. Talking together, debriefing, laughing, crying, whatever. Their point is that the juicy work often happens as you're arriving to or leaving from what we might typically think of as the main event. That the work, is in fact developing relationships. It's building connective tissue. The work is in care. As Hayes says, I believe that witnessing and experiencing the power of reciprocal care can lead to political transformation. So in relational organizing work, we're asking and being asked to hold each other, right? To tend to each other, to hear each other's joys and sorrows. And then, through that, change happens, not the other way around. Hearing each other's joys and sorrows, that sounds familiar, right? I want to take a turn now, if that's okay. Remember, I told you I would. We consented. You've heard a bit about my work with GROW and the Civic Solidarity Project. And we started to talk about the power of invitations, so how it feels to be asked to join a community of care, and to ask others to be with you in work that feels meaningful. And sometimes, I think because the work of building relationships is pleasurable, it's something that we want to do anyway, it feels like it's not part of our work for justice. Because work for justice has to be hard, and we have to be extremely brave to do it all the time. That if we're not getting arrested or tear gassed, if we're not exhausted, if we're not out there every day at every protest, we're not really showing up. And then our ability to do all of this extremely difficult and courageous work is something that just comes from inside of us, just bubbling up like a little spring. And either you're someone who has this ability and you're always capable of doing the right thing, the difficult thing, or you're not. And of course, there are some people, exceptional, exemplary people, who indeed are just naturally extremely courageous. They're the type of person who is always ready. They don't need anyone to call them, to remind them that the meeting is tonight, to offer them a ride to the protest, to invite them to join the group. They're the one who's calling everybody else. But I am not like this. And in fact, I don't think most people are. I think that most of us need to be invited into action again and again and again. We need a reason with a human face. We need to feel like we're part of a group. We need to be a little brave and a little brave and a little brave until all of a sudden together, maybe we've done something astonishing. So the organizer and activist Ella Baker, describing this, famously said, "Strong people don't need strong leaders." And I think that what she meant by this is that we can't rely on one big protest or one powerful speech, because for most folks, it takes more than that for real transformation. When the leader burns out, when the protest ends, we have to have strong and durable connections between each other to stay in the work and to be ready when a moment comes where we do need to act boldly. There's an example of this from our UU history that I want to share with you. And it is so relevant, especially given what Terry just shared with us. This is the story of the Unitarian Universalist response to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s call to Selma. Do folks know about this? Some people do. There's a wonderful book about this that's written by the UU minister and author, Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed. It's called The Selma Awakening. And in his book, Morrison Reed describes how and why UU clergy traveled to Selma in the spring of 1965, and what happened before and then what happened after within our faith and outside of it. So there were a series of marches for voting rights originating from Selma in March of 1965. There was a first on March 7th, where more than 600 unarmed protesters were beaten and tear gassed, marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And immediately after that march, King sent out a telegram calling on clergy of all faiths to travel to join a second march a few days later. And he wrote in part, "All are involved in the sorrow that rises from Selma to contaminate every crevice of our national life. The people of Selma will struggle on for the soul of the nation, but it is fitting that all America help to bear the burden. I call, therefore, on clergy of all faiths to join me for a minister's march in Montgomery." Dr. Morrison Reed writes of that moment that the crisis in Selma lit up the UU network as ministers of congregations across the country called one another. They personally called each other and they said, "I'm going. How about you? I'm going. How about you?" The marches in Selma and the civil rights movement as a whole can sometimes feel like a story that is comprised exclusively of these exemplary main characters, right? Like people acting with tremendous and unfathomable courage, strong leaders. King, Bayard Rustin, Diane Nash, Ralph Abernathy, James Baldwin, so many others. As UUs, we think of people like the Reverend James Reeb and Viola Liuzzo, who were killed in Selma by white supremacists. And of course it was that. Of course it was. But this movement was also the product of a tremendous amount of long-term, dedicated, relational organizing. Years of people calling each other and saying some version of, "I'm going. How about you?" It was networks of people taking the next step in a series of smaller steps, asking each other, what can we do together now? As Ella Baker knew, this movement was comprised of strong people in relationship with one another, moving each other forward. Morrison Reed dedicates a chapter in his book to an attempt to understand specifically why UU clergy traveled to Selma, and the clear through line is relationship. Someone that they cared about and respected asked them to go, or someone they loved was already there. There's a line in that poem that we heard, "To worship is to open the door to one's heart." Worship opens the door to our hearts, and I think what I'm saying is that organizing can do that too. And an open heart is capable of anything. As the poet writes, we were looking at the ceiling, and then we saw the sky. We were looking at the ceiling, and then we saw the sky. The human rights activist and author Loretta Ross reminds us that when we organize ourselves and others to take one more step towards justice, we're engaged in work that's serious. It's work that's often frightening and often painful, but when it's going well, it should be a joy. The most exciting and surprising work in the world. Why wouldn't we want to invite people into this work? So, I want to turn it to you now and ask about a moment when you felt invited into community. We're in a moment in our country right now that's calling us to care for one another in ways big and small. And I want to hear when you've done that, when you were invited to do that. Why did you do it? And what happened next? And in case you're feeling stumped, I want to offer you an invitation of my own. If you're interested in learning more about GROW and our work in Polk County, come talk to me after the service and we can set up a one-to-one and learn.